and details of Fawcett's comics and later DC's comics version of Captain Marvel, the original Marvel is long and complex, from legal battles to rivalries with Superman, and even being compared as a ripoff when the argument is rather recent in and of itself, to modern versions of the character being called Shazam due to issues that have been and might never be resolved. With Superman being debuted in 1938 by National Comics, the prelude to modern DC Comics, one of the main rivals of it, Fawcett Comics, decided to come up with their own concept of a superhero, their own version of Superman, their own version of what a hero should be. The concept was by having other characters such as Ibis the Invincible, Spy Smasher, Golden Arrow, Lonzo Lacey, Scoop Smith, and Dan Dare, which were other characters of Fawcett's, being combined to form a single character. Aspects from all of them would be used for the concept of a new character. A writer who wrote all of these prior Golden Age characters, Bill Parker, is now credited as being one of the figures who created Captain Marvel. The leadership at Fawcett decided that it would be best to combine the team with each of these powers separately into a single character that would embody all of these powers. They also noticed that the writing of most of the comics at the time varied depending on the story, said writer, and said character. C.C. Beck, the other force behind Captain Marvel, was quoted as saying once, quote, "We decided to give our reader a real comic book, drawn in comic strip style and telling an imaginative story, based not on the hackneyed formulas of the pulp magazine, but going back to the old folk tales and myths of classic times." End quote. Parker originally intended for the character to be called Captain Thunder, as the first technical origin of the character was called Flash Comics Issue 1 and Thrill Comics Issue 1, but had low prints made because of circumstances. Later, Fawcett found out that it couldn't trademark the titles Captain Thunder, Flash Comics, or Thrill Comics because all three names were already in use. Marvel's own appearance came in part from popular actor of the time, Fred McMurray, though other sources said Cary Grant and Jack Oakey were considered as well. Fawcett's own founder, Wilford H. Fawcett, was nicknamed Captain Billy, which inspired the name Billy Bastion, as well as Marvel's title of Captain Marvel. Circulation director at the time, Roscoe Kent Fawcett, mentioned to staff, quote, "Give me a Superman, only to have his other identity be a 10 or 12-year-old boy rather than a man." End quote. Besides the main character or his alter ego, Captain Marvel's first adventure in Wiz Comics Issue 2 also introduced his most classic foe, his arch-enemy, the evil Dr. Sivana. The Captain Marvel comics were instantly popular and a crucial success for the company, selling over 500,000 copies for Wiz Comics Issue 2. What's now known as fact is that Captain Marvel proved to be the most popular hero of his age, and his comics easily sold more than any other. Captain Marvel Adventures sold 14 million copies in 1944. As an example of this, at one point in time being published bi-weekly with a circulation of 1.3 million copies an issue. This success did not go unnoticed by Fawcett's competitor, Detective Comics, later known as National Comics Publications, and in modern times, DC Comics. It also wasn't the first time National cried foul against a competitor. Another company, Fox Feature Syndicate, faced National's wrath for using their own Superman-like hero, Wonder Man, and filed a suit against Fawcett for using a similar character that National claimed was similar to Superman. Their own Mastermind character, but Fawcett simply decided to do what Fox Features did. Stop publication of the character and replace him with another, in this case being Bullet Man. However, This time, Fawcett decided to fight the claims that their character, Captain Marvel, was also an illegal ripoff of Superman. Captain Marvel proved to be monumental for the company, and even within a few years became the main comic for the publication company, and was actually the first superhero put into film. The 1941 serial film Adventures of Captain Marvel, released in 1941. By the mid-1940s, Captain Marvel had become the most popular superhero within the United States of America, his comics selling extraordinarily well. Captain Marvel Adventures was the nation's most circulated and bought comic magazine, selling on average at least 1.4 million copies an issue. Fawcett expounded upon Captain Marvel by creating an entire family of spin-off characters. Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, Uncle Marvel, and even Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. While the lawsuit was still pending, ironically, certain aspects of Captain Marvel comics found their way into Superman comics, such as Superman being able to fly like Captain Marvel. Prior to this, he only leapt great distances. Superman's villain of Lex Luthor being a bald mad scientist, much like Captain Marvel's Dr. Sivana, and introducing adventures of Superman as a teenager under the concept of Superboy from Captain Marvel's teenage sidekick, Captain Marvel Jr. The initial hearing had Detective Comics try and fail to have Fawcett cease production of Captain Marvel comics, as well as the release of the Captain Marvel film in June of 1941 as a warning. When Fawcett ignored the request, this was when they were sued in September of 1941. The lawsuit took several years before the action finally went to court in March of 1948. The argument by National was that at the time, Captain Marvel's main powers and characteristics such as super strength, invulnerability, and a skin-tight costume with cape and a news reporter alter ego were taken from Superman. Fawcett argued that while the characters were similar, there was not enough to claim that Captain Marvel was indeed a ripoff of Superman. As evidence to back the claim, National submitted evidence and proof of over 150 pages of comic panels, with Superman performing feats and later examples of Captain Marvel doing similar stunts to prove that Captain Marvel was copying Superman. Fawcett countered the attack in two ways. First, Captain Marvel doing the said actions in the panels at an even earlier time, and providing other examples by providing characters that have been in print even longer, such as Popeye and Tarzan. Testimony from Fawcett employees such as writers, artists, and freelance workers offered varying positions if Fawcett indeed copied work from Superman comics or used inspiration at all in any way from Superman. The trial was decided in favor of Fawcett and Captain Marvel because of information that Fawcett's lawyers had uncovered about Superman's own copyright status. Some of Superman's own newspaper comic strips had not been copyrighted at the time, and the judge who presided over the case decided that National abandoned the Superman claim because such evidence was hypocrisy. However, the judge did agree that Captain Marvel was an illegal copy of Superman. National appealed the decision in 1951, and the decision was that it ruled in favor of National and Superman. However, the Superman comic strips were not under copyright, but Captain Marvel was indeed an infringement of what copyrights existed and what was confirmed. Instead of appealing this, Fawcett decided to settle out of court with National over the losses. The golden age of comics was now over, and sales of comics all across America were declining, and Fawcett decided that it wasn't worth fighting over. Agreeing to the request, National with Fawcett settled out of court and was paid $400,000 in damages, and Fawcett agreed to stop production of all Captain Marvel related comics. As a result of the lawsuit, Fawcett Comics ended up canceling most of its publications and selling the reprint rights to Hoppy the Marvel Bunny to Charlton Comics, who modified the text within the story to call the character Hoppy the Magic Bunny. All of Fawcett's comic writers, artists, and related staff were laid off, including creator C.C. Beck and fellow Captain Marvel writer and Golden Age writer in general, Otto Binder. L. Miller and Son, a small British publisher of black and white Captain Marvel reprints, adopted Captain Marvel into another hero, Marvel Man, who was later renamed Miracle Man, instead of ceasing publications to coincide with the lawsuit's results. Ironically, this character would also become involved with copyright disputes later on due to popularity in the 1950s and revivals in the 1980s. Captain Marvel remained out of print within the 1950s when superhero comics slowly became more popular after the Second World War. With the infighting between National and Fawcett, another new comic publisher in the 1960s would take advantage of the fatigue from the companies and trademark the Captain Marvel name. This would be Modern Marvel Comics, who possess the naming rights to this day. This proved to be confusing and difficult because when DC acquired all of Fawcett's publications once the company collapsed in 1972, and revived Captain Marvel in Shazam comics, they could not use him by his Captain Marvel name because Marvel already owned the rights. Combine this with a license agreement that for every appearance by a Marvel character, there was a fee that had to be paid by DC. As a result, this limited the willingness by DC to use the characters, which meant that Captain Marvel and the Marvel family rarely appeared for the 1970s and 1980s. However, later on in the 1980s and 1990s, DC had acquired all of Fawcett Comics' copyrights. Fawcett might have had the last laugh though. DC found out that they did not have the success that Fawcett had with the character for a few reasons. Firstly is that older comic readers as well as those who had heard of Captain Marvel could not understand why the character was renamed Shazam, thinking it wasn't right that the greatest character to ever use the name Marvel had to change because Marvel Comics got the copyrights to the name. Secondly, exposure for the character was non-existent for decades after the legal battle, so many forgot or never learned about the existence of the character. Though originally mentioned as Captain Marvel within comics, by the 21st century, all references to Captain Marvel is non-existent, with all modern references now as Shazam. The legal battle between National and Fawcett is still mentioned and referred to because of copyright law and plagiarism, because of the conflict and attention that it created. Captain Marvel, first appearance, Wiz Comics, issue 2, February 1940. Wiz Comics issue 2 introduces Billy Baston, a homeless 12-year-old newsboy who sleeps and lives in the subway station of his home city. Eventually, one day, a mysterious man in a green cloak asks Billy to follow him deeper into the station where a magical subway car painted in unusual colors and shapes escorts them to an underground throne room, which is inhabited by an extremely old man with a long white beard and white robe. As the man in the green cloak disappears, the elderly man explains to Billy that he is the wizard Shazam and has used the powers of the gods. These gods are Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, hence the name Shazam, which is an abbreviation of all of the said gods' names. S for the wisdom of Solomon. As Captain Marvel, Billy has instant recollection of vast information and knowledge, also having understanding of most human languages, or the concept of language in general, photographic memory, and to read and write in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Recall anything he has ever learned and is astute in mathematics. In original adventures, he can also hypnotize people. H for the strength of Heracles. As Captain Marvel, Billy has strength equivalent to the Greek demigod of legend Heracles, easily making him one of the strongest characters physically in the Fawcett later DC universe. Much like his namesake, he can easily do the work of several laborers in half the time, and has been considered to be the only character to be as physically strong as Superman. Much like the Golden Age version of Superman, his strength was infinite, and Marvel was strong enough to move stars and planets. A. For the stamina of Atlas. As Captain Marvel, Billy can withstand and survive most physical impacts and assaults upon him. Weak attacks won't even faze him. As anything that can harm him, he can instantly heal from it within seconds without much discomfort. In other stories, this is simply put to similarly with Superman, where Marvel can withstand bullet fire, flames, explosions, or blades. Added to this, the stamina can also prevent Billy from becoming tired and hungry. Z. For the power of Zeus. As Captain Marvel, Billy can use the power of Zeus. Besides being the power source for the magical thunderbolt that transforms Billy into Marvel, it also provides protection against magical attacks. Billy can also use the bolt as a weapon, by shouting Shazam, and at the last moment quickly dodging the bolt and allowing it to strike an opponent instead. Modern stories allow Billy to control and manipulate lightning for various uses. A. For the courage of Achilles. In modern times, this has been the ability both Billy and Marvel use the least, because it's somewhat vague as to what it can do and be. Mostly psychological and spiritual, the courage of Achilles stems from the river Styx and will create an infinite presence of good or cheerfulness that protects him from doubt or intimidation. M. For the speed of Mercury. As Captain Marvel, Billy can channel and use the speed of Mercury, hence he can move at super speeds and fly. Though in older comics he could only leap. In older stories still he was able to travel to the Rock of Eternity at the speed of light from anywhere. In original stories of Captain Marvel, simply saying the word Shazam could turn Billy into Marvel or vice versa. The old wizard Shazam has been battling the forces of evil for over 3,000 years, and has become too frail and old to continue the fight, and needs a successor to carry on the duty. Shazam recounts to Billy that he has been chosen due to the misfortune in his life. He was thrown out of his own home by a greedy uncle who stole his rightful inheritance, following the deaths of his parents, and being a pure and innocent child has made him worthy. Commanded by the old man to shout the name Shazam, Billy is struck by a sudden bolt of lightning and transformed into a super-powered adult in a red costume with gold trimmings with a white cape. Even voice recordings could bring the bolt to change him to and from superhero form. The wizard Shazam declares Billy Baston as the new hero Captain Marvel and decrees that he shall now carry on his work. As a stone block suspended above his throne upon where he sat falls upon him, killing him as prophesied, with no further contact from the wizard. However, in later retellings of Captain Marvel's origin, the wizard would return as a spirit to mentor Billy, and Captain Marvel can summon him by lighting a torch on the wall of his lair. As a spirit, the wizard Shazam lives at the Rock of Eternity, a bicone-shaped rock located at the nexus of time and space. Once again, later retellings of the origin story place Shazam's underground lair within the rock. The first battle that Captain Marvel had was against the mad scientist Dr. Sivana, who created a device which threatened to silence all radio transmissions and broadcasts unless he is paid $50 million. Billy convinces the Wiz radio owner to hire him as a boy reporter if he can stop the radio silencer device, which he does, in his alternate form of Captain Marvel. As a result of this, Sivana becomes Marvel's arch enemy, and Billy becomes a reporter and in-studio host for Wiz Radio with his reporting career, allowing him to travel and investigate criminal activity. Billy was not one to always rely on the power of Shazam to turn into Captain Marvel. He would do things in his regular form as long as he can and only resort as a last resort to transforming, and he would use the powers naturally bestowed upon him. An adult daughter of Sivana, Butia, became an unwitting love interest for the shy Captain Marvel despite her allegiance to her father. The character Butia would not exactly be retold in modern versions of the character Captain Marvel or with Dr. Sivana. The basic concept of the origin between Marvel and Sivana remain essentially unchanged through modern times with minor changes. Though later stories would often change or edit the origin of Marvel, the core aspects of the character remain as this. Billy would often use the powers of the wizard Shazam as Captain Marvel and go on various adventures. The topic of discussion will now proceed to the allies of Captain Marvel. Of course, due to Marvel Comics now possessing the Captain Marvel trademark, DC is unable to use Fawcett's Comics' original title for the family, and modern versions of the family are called the Shazam Family. Once again, much like Captain Marvel, the Marvel family was originally based on real-life people who were employed at Fawcett Comics, or real-life actors or actresses. The Marvel family was established in 1942 with the introduction of Captain Marvel's partners, the Lieutenant Marvels, Captain Marvel Jr., and Mary Marvel. With these characters added to Marvel's team, he was the first hero to have sidekicks who had powers, abilities, or even appearances similar to his own. This idea concept would be later taken by DC for Superman, Batman, Aquaman, and countless others. The various comic lines of Marvel was seen with many in Fawcett Comics such as Wiz Comics, WoW Comics, Monster Comics, Captain Marvel Adventures, Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, and the Marvel family. By the late 1940s, the Marvel comics were the most popular, arguably, out of any comic or publisher. The Marvel line even expanded to non-Marvel origin characters such as Uncle Marvel and Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. But by the early 1950s, all Marvel comics ceased following the lawsuit between National and Fawcett. Due to conflict with name copyrights and writer uncertainty with the characters, when DC brought back Captain Marvel into the modern DC universe, the Marvel family wasn't technically brought back with them at that time. In one of the first real appearances in 1986's Legends miniseries, Captain Marvel was established as a solo hero with no supporting characters. Through 1995, with the Power of Shazam series, the family was brought back in modern times. Information about the Marvel family members will now be mentioned in detail. Mary Marvel. First appearance, Captain Marvel Adventures, issue 18, December 1942. Besides Billy Baston as Captain Marvel, the most well-known member of the Marvel family is Mary Marvel. When originally introduced, her appearance and personality was partially based on that of a well-known actress at the time in America, Judy Garland. Though she made appearances in the Fawcett Marvel line of comics, much like all of the Marvels after the legal battle between Fawcett and National, she was out of print for decades. From the character's initial creation in 1942, the last time that she was seen before the DC Modern Revival was in 1956. As infants, twins Billy and Mary Baston were carried and nursed for by a woman named Sarah Prim. When the parents of the Baston twins tragically died in a car accident, Kara was required to send both of them to an orphanage. However, Sarah is determined to at least give one of the children a chance to live in a good home and arranges for Mary to secretly take the place of another baby girl who suddenly, tragically, while under her care. As a result of this planning, Billy is sent to an orphanage while his sister is raised by a wealthy woman by the name of Miss Bromfield. A number of years later, Billy becomes a teenage radio announcer, and while at his job, he receives an urgent letter from Sarah, who is now on her deathbed and wants to see him before she passes away. Upon coming out to see her, Sarah tells Billy of his long-lost sister. To help him in the endeavor, Sarah gives him a locket broken in half and tells him with her final breath that Mary holds the other half and dies after. When Billy gets back to the radio broadcasting show he was hosting, afterwards he mentions what happened to his best friend Freddie Freeman, and then recalls that one of the contestants on the show was a rich girl named Mary Bromfield who wore a broken locket. Deciding to see if that locket was the one that Sarah mentioned, Both Billy and Freddy later transform into their alter egos and follow Mary's limousine and actually save Mary from a group of kidnappers. Both lockets match, and both Captain Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. reveal their identities to Mary, and theorize that she might be able to use the power of the wizard Shazam as well, since she's Billy's twin sister. But both Billy and Freddy scoff at the concept. But during the trio's conversation, the kidnappers whom they were subdued manage to escape and overpower both Billy and Freddy. As both are unable to shout Shazam, she says it accidentally and is struck by the bolt of lightning and transforms into a superpowered version of herself, and saves both Billy and Freddy. Billy dubs her Mary Marvel, as later on the wizard Shazam mentions the goddesses who her strength is derived from. Older Fawcett and DC comic stories had the deities that Mary Marvel derived her power from were different than Billy when he transformed into Marvel for the first time. Hers were ancient goddesses of power, and they were S for Selene, for grace, H for Hippolyta, for strength, which is actually the same one that's related to Wonder Woman, A for Adrian, for skill. In later stories it was changed to Artemis, Z for Zephyrus for fleetness, hence flight, A for Aurora for beauty. Later stories had it changed to Aphrodite, M for Minerva for wisdom. Though in the oldest Fawcett comics, when Mary Marvel got these powers as being bestowed from goddesses, but some accounts have Zephyrus as a god. Captain Marvel Jr. First appearance, Wiz Comics, issue number 25, December 1941. When Captain Marvel was first introduced, he proved to be an instant hit with readers. Naturally, Fawcett decided to come up with a spin-off character. Though Captain Marvel had somewhat sidekicks with the Lieutenant Marvels, he didn't really technically have a real sidekick. Fawcett leadership also wanted Marvel's real sidekick to be different and distinctive. The concept was for a boy to transform and use the powers of Shazam, but to remain as a teenager in the transformed form, as compared to Marvel, who transformed from boy to adult. Also, when Billy transformed into Marvel, he shouted Shazam. For Freddy to transform into Captain Marvel Jr., he would shout Captain Marvel, as a subconscious gesture for frequent readers to buy Captain Marvel's comic books. The Captain Marvel Jr. stories were noticeably different from the Captain Marvel stories, as the artistic style was more serious when compared to the cartoon-like style of Captain Marvel's main book. Many stories were also Second World War themed and focused on the plight and values of the working class. Out of all the Fawcett lines published during the Second Great War, Captain Marvel Jr. stories were the most active, with pro-Allied themes heavily mentioned in a number of issues. Fawcett's origin had it that the arc was connected with another Fawcett publication, Monster Comics, in 1941. Printed during the height of the Second World War, Fawcett heroes Bulletman and Captain Marvel were against Adolf Hitler's superhero Captain Nazi. During a battle between them, a punch of Captain Marvel sends Captain Nazi into a lake within the vicinity of the fight. An elderly man and teenage boy who happen to be fishing nearby in a boat, not knowing who this unconscious man is, they pull him into the boat to avoid him drowning. However, Nazi immediately wakes up and throws the old man into the lake and knocks out the boy with one of the boat's oars. The old man immediately dies from being thrown, but Captain Marvel is able to save the boy, whose name is Freeman, and takes him to a local hospital. Billy learns from a nurse that Freddy isn't expected to survive the night due to his injuries. Billy decides to take the situation into his own hands as he takes Freddy to the chamber where he obtained the powers from Shazam and asks the wizard to help and heal Freddy. Shazam says to Billy that he can't do this, but he can siphon off a small portion of his own powers to Freddy, who isn't expected to walk again. Billy transforms back into Captain Marvel as the ghost of Shazam disappears. At this very moment, Freddy awakens and mentions that it's Captain Marvel, as then Freddy transforms into a powered version of himself. Now called Captain Marvel Jr., he resembles a younger version of Captain Marvel, though instead of the red and yellow costume, it's a blue and yellow color, and instead of a white cape, it's red. Marvel tells Freddy that he can't remain in his powered form all the time, but he has to allow his regular body to heal as much as it can. With that, Freddy says his mentor's name again and reverts back to his basic form. Marvel later takes Freddy back to the hospital, but he has a permanent disability with his left leg and is forced to walk with a crutch, though Captain Marvel Jr. doesn't have the said disability. Because of the death of the old man, his grandfather, and his permanent injury, he seeks revenge against Captain Nazi, and the two battle often during the wartime Fawcett comics. Within most of his original adventures, the circumstances had Freddie Freeman be pitied for his injuries. Naturally, there would be some correspondence to soldiers who were injured in battle to Freddy's own handicapped situation. Added to this, he could not properly introduce himself to others, for he would turn back into his basic human form as Captain Marvel Jr. This was a major focus for Fawcett, but the concept was mostly ignored by later DC stories. Captain Marvel Jr. would be reintroduced to modern DC comics in the mid-1990s. The Lieutenant Marvels. First appearances. Wade's Comics, issue 21, September 1941. Much like the other Marvel members, they were based on real-life people, men who worked at Fawcett at the time. Paul Peck for Tall Billy, Ed Hamilton for Hillbilly, and Frank Tiger for Fat Billy. Technically, they aren't as powerful as Captain Marvel himself, nor Mary Marvel, or even Captain Marvel Jr. The three of them share the ability to tap into Shazam's power source at the same time. Hence, they're only a third of the strength or ability of Captain Marvel himself. Appearing regularly during the 1950s, they too fell into obscurity with Fawcett's loss against National during the court case. In modern times, they have appeared rarely due to writers' inability to use the characters in modern times, only sporadically during the 1970s and 1980s. Brooklyn, New York City had its own Billy Bastion, as well as the Western United States and Southern United States to visit the original real Billy Bastion. To prevent confusion among the Bastions, the Western Billy suggests he be called Tall Billy. The Southern Billy is named Hillbilly, and the Northeast Brooklyn Billy renamed Fat Billy. At the original Billy's request, they formed the Billy Bastion Club, as he later reveals that he's Captain Marvel and they should only use the Shazam power when he deems it necessary. During a scheme by Dr. Sivana to kill the real Billy Bastion, the other Bastions are captured instead. Confused by the three other Billies, and during a fight with all of their lives at risk, they all shout Shazam in unison and become superpowered versions of themselves. Hill Marvel later comments that they've all become Captain Marvels, but Fat Marvel counters and says that there's only one Marvel, and that they're more like Lieutenant Marvels, which is why the three Billies are called the Lieutenant Marvels. Not necessarily mentioned in modern Captain Marvel stories, the Lieutenant Marvel trio have made slight appearances but have lost their powers due to modern circumstances. Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. First appearance, Fawcett's Funny Animals, issue 1, December 1942. When Fawcett expanded the Captain Marvel universe, the concept even went to anthropomorphic animals. Even though Fawcett's golden age, the character made few appearances. Because of the legal battle with National Comics, a number of rights to characters were bought by Charlton Comics, and Hoppy the Funny Animals stories were then published by that company. After DC bought all the remaining Fawcett rights, Hoppy even still only made sporadic appearances in modern times. Hoppy the Bunny was actually a fan of Captain Marvel, who lives in the town of Funny Animalville. One day, he actually decides to imitate his hero and shouts Shazam like he does. Surprisingly, he is then hit by a bolt of lightning and transforms into Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. Uncle Marvel. First appearance, WoW Comics, issue 18, October 1943. Another supporting character for the Marvels, Dudley was an old man who happened to find Mary Baston's ledger in which she kept information of good acts that she had done. Upon reading this, he learned her secret. Later, he claimed to be the uncle of Mary Baston. He actually attempted to deceive his way into the Marvel family. But the Marvel family members, having the wisdom of Solomon, saw through Dudley's deception, but since he was in their way a quote-unquote lovable old fraud, they allowed Dudley to join the team as their manager, and often laughed at him pretending to actually have Shazam's powers. When they actually asked to use his powers, Dudley would often complain that old age and lower back problems would keep him from using it, but the Marvels always knew the truth. Though mostly for humor within Marvel stories, there was one example in which Dudley was an important factor in Marvel Family issue 1, which was Black Adam's first appearance, in which he tricks him to saying Shazam and reverts to his basic self. Uncle Marvel appeared within Marvel Family stories through the 1940s until the lawsuit between Fawcett and National, after which the character quietly disappeared. However, when DC obtained the Fawcett rights in the 1970s, Uncle Marvel appeared back. Explained as he was put into suspended animation with other Fawcett characters as an attack gone wrong by Dr. Sivana. In the 1990s, during a Captain Marvel miniseries, he debuted as a blood-related uncle of Billy Bastion. In modern DC Comics, the character has not technically appeared at all, only having brief cameo appearances. With the allies and supporting characters of Captain Marvel now known, let the discussion move now to the foes and villains of Captain Marvel. Dr. Sivana. First appearance, Wiz Comics, issue 2, February 1940. Dr. Thaddeus Bodog Sivana is the oldest and main foe of Captain Marvel, appearing in most of the Golden Age stories of Captain Marvel and being the first to discover Captain Marvel's identity of being Billy Bastion. The original concept for the mad scientist archetype, it's argued that Lex Luthor was based on his concept by Fawcett. Dr. Sivana, born in 1892, started out with the best intentions and was one of the most respected scientists within Europe. His notions and forward thinking were immediately repulsed by the old colonial authorities of Europe. Everyone he approached seeking grounds for his scientific projects were rejected. Eventually having enough, Sivana created a spaceship and took his family to the planet Venus, remaining there until his children were fully grown and Earth not as braquous as when he had left it. It's theorized that since his children were adults by the 1940s, he must have left Earth shortly before the First World War. With his return, he tried to extort $50 million by threatening to stop all radio communications, but only to be stopped by Captain Marvel. However, much like the Marvel family characters, Fawcett ceased publishing with the character in 1953. The absence was explained in modern DC Comics as that absence was nearly 20 years from the 1950s through to the 1970s revival, that during an incident with the Marvels, they finally trapped them within a containment sphere. Overjoyed with celebration, Sivana's son, Sivana Jr., accidentally slapped them on the back too hard during the celebration and caused them to be suspended as well. The sphere would eventually be melted as they were out in space, and the sphere was close to the sun, melting it. Marvel was eventually free from the sphere, as well the other Marvels, whom pushed the sphere back to Earth, with the Sivanas escaping in their own ship but was later apprehended by Captain Marvel. Sivana was also responsible for reviving Black Adam in modern times. The Golden Age Sivana was a twice-widowed father with 4 children. The good adult Butia, who had an unwanted relationship with Captain Marvel, who was also the Empress of Venus, the strong Magnificus, and evil teenagers Georgia and Thaddeus Sivana Jr. Black Adam. First appearance, The Marvel Family, Issue 1, December 1945. Black Adam's real original name is Teth Adam, hence Egyptian for the first Adam or mighty human. When Adam was introduced in Fawcett Comics, the original version of him was defeated in the same issue of his first appearance, and nothing was heard more of the character again until DC revived the character in the 1970s. When the wizard Shazam sought a successor, Teth Adam first came to him. Deciding that this Egyptian man worthy of the powers of Shazam, he grants him the ability to transform into the Marvel version of himself. However, soon Adam is corrupted by the vast and great powers of his abilities. Originally, Shazam gave Adam powers from ancient Greco-Roman deities, much like Marvel, but it was later changed to ancient Egyptian gods. S for Shu, stamina, H for Hershef, strength, A for Ammon, power, Z for Zeti, or Thoth, wisdom, A for Apnu, speed, and M for Menthu, courage. Deciding that he should rule Egypt, he overthrows the pharaoh and kills him and takes over Egypt. Angered by this, Shazam renames this Captain Marvel Black Adam. And unable to remove the powers given to him, Shazam banishes Adam to the most distant star in the universe. Black Adam then spends the next 5,000 years flying back to Earth. By the time he returns in 1945, Shazam has already appointed 3 new guardians to protect the world: Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, and Captain Marvel Jr. Adam's attempts to take over the world get the attention of the Marvel family, and Shazam mentions the history and truth of Adam to them. During events, Adam succeeds in tying up Billy and Freddy while they're talking with Shazam. While Adam is occupied, Uncle Marvel unties the both of them, allowing them time to transform into their Marvel-powered versions. However, Adam then fights Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel, and Captain Marvel Jr., but the battle is a stalemate because all of their powers are exactly the same. Uncle Marvel, the only non-powered Marvel, tricks Adam by mentioning Shazam, and Black Adam reverts to Teth Adam, and instantly 5,000 years of aging affects him, and Captain Marvel knocks him out and he dies, transforming into a skeleton. Once DC revived the character in the 1970s, Dr. Sivana uses a machine to revive him. Black Adam wore a costume similar to the Marvels, but unlike Captain Marvel, his is black instead of red and no cape unlike all the others. When DC first revived the character, it was so that he could be brought back from the dead by Dr. Sivana. Adam then destroys the machine so he can't be killed or revived in that same method again. Mr. Mind. First appearance, Captain Marvel Adventures, issue 26, August 1943. Much like Dr. Sivana and Black Adam, Mr. Mind is one of Captain Marvel's key villains. Forming the Monster Society of Evil, this was one of the first examples of a supervillain group, done by Fawcett and later imitated by other publishers. The original Mr. Mind showed in Fawcett Comics and pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths DC Comics was that of a cartoonish worm possessing extraordinary intelligence more so than regular human beings. The worm claimed to be a mutant worm from a distant planet who was much more intelligent than the general population of worms there, which communicated through touch. Possessing limited telepathy and ability to spin nearly indestructible silk, he spoke aloud through the use of a talk box hung around his neck, which amplified the telepathic voice. Original examples of the Monster Society of Evil range in membership and size throughout the years, from thousands including all of the Axis powers during the Second World War, to only a small handful in DC's modern examples. Though there were more heroes and villains relating to Captain Marvel, these were the most important. With the main focus of the discussion done, let us bring the discussion to some final aspects of discussion. The Rock of Eternity. This is where the ghost of the wizard Shazam resides. Within the original Fawcett stories, it's the residence of the ancient wizard who granted Black Adam, Captain Marvel, and the Marvel family with the powers of the gods. In the oldest stories, the lair of Shazam was depicted as an underground lair accessible only by a magic subway car. The lair itself included his throne and stone personifications of the deadly sins according to Christian religious teachings. After Shazam's death, lighting a torch in the lair would summon his ghost for advice. Later on, the Marvels could choose to journey to the rock by flying faster than light itself. Surrounding the rock was mists and essences representing space and time. Venturing through it could allow the Marvels to reach specific or various locations through time and space. Who is stronger, Superman or Captain Marvel? Originally, the greatest debate in comics who was the strongest hero, either Superman or Captain Marvel. Though Superman was created first, it's argued that Captain Marvel had more innovations, like sidekicks, villains, and groups. When Nationals sued Fawcett over Captain Marvel being an illegal copy of Superman, it was mostly out of fear that Captain Marvel was outselling Superman in terms of comics and being more popular arguably. Captain Marvel comics sold more than any other publisher during the Golden Age, and during its height, Captain Marvel was the most well-known superhero within America. The writing and stories were also arguably better as well. Once DC obtained the rights to use Captain Marvel within their comics, stories often had the two of them being nearly equal in terms of power. It's been said more than once that Captain Marvel is essentially the only hero who can match Superman in any aspect, and one of the best examples was in Kingdom Come, when Captain Marvel was the only one who could stop Superman or stand in his way. Captain Marvel's powers are more magic-based, and according to some, this is why many of his attacks can harm Superman more than anyone else's, because of one of the few weaknesses that Superman has are mostly magic-based. And this is exactly what the essence of Captain Marvel's powers and abilities are. Final thoughts. Though Captain Marvel has been around just as long as Superman has, but because of the legal battle, there is about 20 years from the 1950s through the 1970s in which stories could have been written and continuity added for any, all, or some of the characters. Only in modern times has the Marvel family and related characters have had more stories done with them. What do those listening and watching think of the world's mightiest mortal?